It finally happened.
Yes.
Finally
What?
happened. I've heard the
I'm so
name
glad, but what
Andrew
is it?
Greer for so
Yes.
many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many times you're like, well, you remember when he was in the studio?
Mm-hmm.
No.
I
For
know
whatever
that-
reason, you kept
How
scheduling
in the
Andrew
world?
when I was gone. And it finally happened that we got Andrew in the studio. I'm so glad that we did that. And I am so looking forward to today's conversation as we talk about a former president.
Yeah, it's a double blessing because we not only get to introduce you, gentlemen, officially, but we do get to learn something about a former president that you might not have known. Finding out what it means to become a friend or an acquaintance friend of a president, I want to know, Andrew Greer, how in the world you have put this book together. And so having you in studio talk about More Than a President, Sundays with Jimmy Carter, is pretty cool. And you've done a documentary for PBS to talk about this, which is really intriguing. But let's start with the book.
Okay.
Because I feel like though they're similar projects, they're very different.
Yes, true. Well, the book is President Carter's words, right? Where the documentary he was a part of and his, essence in some context was expressed. These are his expressions, right?
Right.
And so for years, I'll give a little bit of the backstory because some people may not know, but President Carter taught Sunday school really the majority of his adult life. He did when he was in the Navy. He did when he came back home to be a peanut farmer. This collection begins when he was teaching Sunday school, beginning as President of the United States, which is kind of wild to
That's so
think
cool.
about,
I did
right?
not know
Right?
that.
Yeah, and a lot
Until
of people
this.
don't. Even people who knew he taught at Maranatha and Plains for years. But he taught, so Fred Gregg was the director of the couple Sunday school class, which is just where Jimmy and Rosalind went to church when they were at home in D.C., at First Baptist Church of the city of Washington, D.C., still a thriving church there. And the director said, would you sub some, and he knew that teaching was in his background. He was
He
like,
asked
sure.
the president.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
so
Just
funny.
checking.
Yeah.
Just
I
checking
know,
if I'm
which
getting
is
that story.
bold in its own way, but
Yes.
also is a good expression of how they quickly integrated just as citizens
People,
really
yep.
into and how important church life was and church community was. Those became some of their dear friends while in DC. So he ended up teaching a couple dozen times. Of course, they couldn't publicize it then with all the red tape of that, but someone did have the wherewithal to record it, thankfully, and record it well. So I included some of those lessons. And then, of course, when President Carter was defeated for a second term by Ronald Reagan, came home to Plains before they really figured out what they were going to do with their humanitarian work. They began kind of grounding themselves with church and teaching Sunday school. So from 1981 until the pandemic, till the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, he taught Sunday school on average half of the year, 26 Sundays a year. And this is while he may have been in Libya the day before, he may have been in Palestine, or he may have been in Sudan, or he may have been, in Utah, whatever. And they made it a priority to be a part. And that included cutting the grass at the church. That included making the plates. He's a carpenter, a woodworker, and we still use those plates to collect the offering with the little JC on the back. So church life was very important, but teaching Sunday school was equally as important. So that's what I've done with the book, is collect 15 lessons. I poured through hundreds
Yeah.
and put them in chapter form. They're his words. And then I wrote some introductions to kind of contextualize what were the Carters doing in their life that might have expressed part of what they were, the insights they were discovering through the scriptures they were teaching.
I love the fact that you've done this. And as you really kind of got to know him, read his words, talk to people who knew him, all the things, what you think really drove him to the point where, you know what, I'm going to teach this Sunday school class. I'm going to make sure I'm there every Sunday I possibly can be in this little town, Plains, Georgia, 500 to 700 people in this church. What was it that you think really drove him to say, this is something that is so important, I've got to be there?
That's a good question, and it's a big commitment. We know
Yeah.
that even just volunteering in our churches as lay people, it's not simple to schedule our lives around church. So what drove that commitment, I think it's layered. from my perception. And in fact, I was talking with his niece, Kim Carter Fuller, has been a part of moderating some book festivals we've been on. She's a dear, dear friend, and she teaches Sunday school. She substitute taught for him or kind of volleyed with him in teaching. She would teach on non-Jimmy Sundays is what they call them. And she still teaches the adult Sunday school class now and has a lot of her uncle's spirit and her love of Scripture and love of teaching from Scripture. But I think it was a heart and like real mind, heart, spirit groundedness. I think the accountability to teach produces an accountability to study.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he was a researcher, he's a studier, he's an academic on many levels. So he loved the knowledge, the brain part of it. But I talked in one of the introductions about a Sunday that he was scheduled to teach where his grandson, 28-year-old grandson, Jeremy, passed away unexpectedly. They raced up towards Atlanta where they lived the night before, but he called Kim and said, would you start the lesson? I'm going to be there. And he knew there would be pews of people coming in from all over, not just the country, but there were people from all over the world that would make this pilgrimage to hear him teach. And she said, sure. She started. Well, he came in eventually about 15, 20 minutes, sure enough, as he promised. And you could kind of sense a tension in the room. I mean, this is a man who just lost his grandson.
Yeah.
And he kind of knowingly, as family does, hugged Kim, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and just that connection of, yeah, we know what we've lost today. And then he began to teach about Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
It's just phenomenal to me to think about really, again, I would say the courage to press into the truths of Scripture, which are the truths of God when interpreted purely. And I think why he needed to be in Sunday school, he could have canceled. I mean, my goodness.
Everyone
would
would have understood.
Yep.
But I think it was a certain grounding that he needed at all seasons of his life, including in the very beginning of the process of grief in that instance, So I think that. I also think he really was he challenged himself to stretch, challenge his mind, challenge his heart, challenge his thoughts, consistently weighing them out before God, testing them out with the Scripture. So I think that was just a way to do that, Well, I've got to teach people on Sunday from this passage, so now I'm going to have to see what I think about
Better
it and
study
see
it.
what comes up from it, that kind of thing.
So you started though in Nashville. Like you're from Texas. You came to Nashville for college.
3
You stayed
years.
in Nashville for
20 years,
a
yeah.
lot of years. And then you start migrating down to Plains, but to meet the president
Right.
and his wife
Right.
to be part of this story that you're sharing with us. But why? Why President Jimmy Carter?
That's a really good question because it's easy to see presidents, any of them, align them with their politics or whatever. I was born in the Reagan era, and so I did not know them as political figures. I really met them, if you will, through the pages of the books that he wrote about his experiences throughout the world and his experiences at home in Georgia. And it was that resonance with his passion for his neighbors. I think it really was. I've always been interested in the civil rights movement in America. It's just always, I've loved the grittiness of it and the learnedness of Americans from it. And so to find out a president who grew up in the 1920s and 30s in the deep, deep segregated South was primarily influenced by his black neighbors and carried that throughout his life, it just was fascinating to me. Then to go on Google and find out you can go be in the room with him in an A-frame church with 250 other people. That's it. And then if you stay for church, you can have a picture with him afterwards. He made people stay for church if they wanted a picture. So I just found all that campy and it's like my style. It's my personality. Fell in love. But I had no idea that the story of my life would intersect with the people of Plains or the Carter family or any of that. That just happened naturally through filming the documentary Plain Spoken that I directed and then transpired into being a part of the community, moving to town. I just didn't know. I did not know there was a compartment in my heart named Planes. They gave me the key, and who knew? There it was. So I think it's like finding a spouse. You just don't know until you know.
Sure.
It's like, well, where were you? Like, and here we are.
Where you
and
been all my life?
yeah. So I think that was that. But yes, it was an intrigue in the way they interfaced with the world in the public square, never having been employed by the church or by some faith-based segment, but yet consistently attempting to follow Jesus in the best way they knew how in the work that they were to do in the world post-presidency when I came across them, which of course was helping to heal diseases and moderate elections, fair elections, and be human rights really is what they were about.
I think human rights, Habitat for Humanity, other things along those lines. I mean, it sounds like he was absolutely faith in action.
Yeah. I think service-oriented was it, Now, I do think all of us put our faith into action for different reasons. And, I mean, President Carter was a doggedly determined person in helping people. That can be its own God, So I think that's part of challenging it with the scriptures, too, is like, what are my motivations for doing why I do what I do, which is something all of us struggle with or have to take time to think through. That was probably one of the hero aspects of his life for me, is a continual challenging of himself again, of like, why am I doing what I do? And that changes what we do a lot, I think. Makes it more impactful. It doesn't have to be saving people in developing countries. It could be any work.
But what he did in his community, in this little bitty town of Plains, Georgia, did impact a lot of people. And if you did per capita, like it was a lot of people in this tiny little town. He knew the community. He knew the needs. He and Rosalind got in there and they got their hands dirty. And you've witnessed and talked to people in the documentary, Plain Spoken. You talked to people that were the beneficiaries, if you will, of the efforts that they made. What was a common thread? I mean, obviously their givingness, but even deeper than that, what did you notice that the people came away from their own story once they had crossed paths with the Carters?
Well, maybe a sense of belonging, a certain sense of being valued, or maybe that translates into worth. Depending on what each person they came into contact with was maybe where the gaps were. I think a lot of it was, it was driven by humility. I do think very humble people. I think humility expressed through love, helps someone feel okay within themselves. And I think largely that is the gospel. It's like to be rescued from myself in my mind takes Jesus being okay with who I am before coming in to save the day. If you don't find someone valuable or worthwhile, you don't help them. It takes a ground level belief in the value of a person to want to love them to the degree that will change them. And that is Jesus. So then in and through us, that can be Jesus. So that is, I think, was the palpable. People who may not subscribe to Christianity, may not know anything about Christianity, or may subscribe to another religion, still coming into contact with that kind of ground level love is, powerful. It's powerful even just for the day.
Sure.
You know? Sometimes that's what we need is like, what gets us to the morning,
And so as you really began to pour over his life, his teachings, his writings, the people he interacted with, they had the opportunity to get to know family and all of that, as you think about his impact on you. Because as you said, you never knew him really as the political figure. Obviously,
right.
Much of the world did.
Right.
But as you think about his impact on you and the way in which his impact on the community now influences you.
Mhm.
Like, what do you think his real legacy is?
His favorite verse, which was read at his funeral, it may have been read at all his funerals. I'm not sure if it was read at the National Cathedral. I know it was at Maranatha before they're laid to rest just down the street. And so it is Ephesians 4:32, be ye kind and tenderhearted. And so I think that's both of their legacies, is what that might produce in our communities. Well, first in our own lives, in our own graciousness to ourselves, then in the life of our neighbor, and then communities and world. It has that ripple effect. So it would be the same. His legacy that I think is his legacy around the world would be the same impact in me, and that's be kind, be tender. I don't, there's a lot of opinions about everything, and I certainly have mine. But at the end of the day, I still feel like, I don't know if it's the right word to say to distill the gospel, but if you bring it down to its ground level, its love is born out of how we treat one another. Love God, love your neighbor. All the law and the prophets hinge on these two things.
Well, and part of the fruit of the Spirit is kindness.
Right.
Gentleness, right? Like he weaves that through
Yeah,
Scripture to
gentleness.
remind us. You think he wondered if we'd be hard-headed? Like obviously he
Yeah.
knew, because he kept going back to some of these things to remind us, this is how you're to treat one another. Love me, love one another. And through the documentary, Plain Spoken, that you put together, you hear people talk about his kindness, but the experience that I hear come from that sweet little town is so different. Like, it depended on who you talk to. Not with the Carters necessarily,
sure.
but with the subject matter
Sure.
of racial reconciliation.
Yes.
And like you had one sweet lady say, you asked the question, is there racism in this town? She's like, no. And you ask another lady and she goes, I mean,
Yeah, right.
we're working on it.
Yeah, right.
And the Carters would work hard to level the ground and to
Sure.
let everybody be seen as a human being,
Sure.
not as the color of their skin,
Sure.
which is a testament to the legacy
Yes,
that
his
they
faith,
knew
yeah.
everybody was created in the image of God. So much so that they changed churches. What a statement. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I, of course, was not a firsthand witness to this, but Plains Baptist Church, which is a historic Baptist church in Plains and is still an active church there, an active congregation. But in 1976, which was in the throes of the presidential campaign, there was the pastor there, who I believe was a younger guy at the time. He challenged, along with the congregation or some congregants, that there were some bylaws essentially that stated black people can't be members or worship there. Of course, this is 1976, and this is the Deep South we're talking about. So who knows when those were incorporated into it, under what ideals, what differences of thinking that had not evolved at that point. But when challenged, it did not get changed. And so Maranatha Baptist Church, which is where the Carters home church from post-presidency till death, and where he taught all those years, became an offshoot, 29 members, just decided that was not, that they wanted to ground a church in being open to everybody. That's never going to be done perfectly, right? But that was the idea. Now, how the Carters ended up becoming members of Maranatha after the presidency is a little bit of folklore. You hear different stories. I don't recall them ever saying exactly how that went down or recording it in all of his books, but essentially they chose. When they came back, they said, let's go to Maranatha. Now, I think a positive light on that is because there are incredible congregants pursuing the pathway of Jesus at Plains Baptist. There are incredible congregants doing that at Maranatha. But I think this unique history, and more than a president, this unique history of a president teaching Sunday school to whomever wanted to attend, could not have been infrastructured or happened outside of the service-oriented hospitality of those members of Maranatha. It just was a chemistry and a partnership with President Carter that worked. And so, for whatever reason, maybe the critical and negative reasons that positioned a church to become a new body, really, I don't know how everything works in the great mystery of God, but maybe it was important that he have the opportunity to teach so that people, everyone from Muslims to atheists to different, every socioeconomic class and race background, and people who have state religions in their countries can come to a place to hear from someone who, really believed in the power of Jesus.
Yeah. How big of a draw was he? I mean, obviously there's the regular congregants,
Which
but
is like
how
30
many,
to 40.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so how many other people were
Yeah.
coming just because they had the opportunity to hear a former president
a
teach
lot.
Sunday school?
I mean, there's 10 churches in Plains and there's 500 people, so you do the math.
Yeah.
So no congregation is going to be enormous. But for sure, there were hundreds that would come. Now, they never advertised it officially. It was just a grassroots swell. He just started doing it, and it started getting the word out. I think at first it was like Georgia churches and maybe retired people on their buses, coming or whatever. And then it went from there. And then when he got brain cancer in 2015 at 90 or 91, that was a trigger for a lot of people who'd always wanted to come. He ended up, the cancer disappeared, which was phenomenal. And so that gave another few years of a really large flock of people coming. And there were times of overflow. They would put them all throughout the church in all the rooms and have it live fed, and he would go visit each room and just had his way of incorporating everybody. But yeah, it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew.
And 96 years, that's how long he was here.
Well, he lived 100 years.
Oh, 100 years, that's right.
But
that's right.
he
that is
taught
right.
until
he
was
was
96. Yeah.
100 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible.
Yeah,
Isn't
and
it?
he attended church really until he was about 98. And then his body started to take over at that time. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the name of the book is More Than a President, Sundays with Jimmy Carter, the special, the PBS documentary, plain spoken. And man, if you want more information about either one of these things or both, go check out the show notes. We've got links and more information about that, about Andrew there. And Andrew, appreciate you coming in, spending some time with us over a couple of podcasts here.
I know, reconvening with old friends. We can incorporate all us into this.
Absolutely.
I feel like I know you through the golden voice of Don and Steve.
Well, yeah, that was the crazy thing.
Yeah.
He's been in the different studios with you, and even when we were working together for years, but this was the first time we actually finally got to meet.
Aren't
I mean,
you
like,
lucky?
yeah, I am.
No, I'm
it's
lucky.
It's about time.
I'm lucky.
It's about time. So go find out more about Andrew. Click in the show notes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Hope that you will like and subscribe and check out Raphael's Roastery. We appreciate their support of the podcast as well.